Well, the motor does have to come back out. I do have to do the clutch, and I do also have to reseal the engine. It's had an oil leak for a little while that I never was able to figure out. I believe it's the oil dipstick. I'm just going to seal everything in that area and call it a day. And then we pop it back in, and then I'm hooking everything back up, and fingers crossed, it should start. Needs a couple tweaks, but I do have the tank hold bar that will be, I haven't figured it out yet, I might just run with wood, who cares, to hold the actual gas tank in place. This is welded to the body, and over here we have the battery tray that'll hold a battery. It's sized for a 24F, that's the battery I was going to run. I got a used core that still held charge that I'm just going to take because it's free. But yeah, we're moving on to the last of the fabrication, thank God, which is this intercooler setup. This is just kind of modified from the factory one, or not factory at all, from the one that I made. Thick ass welds, we're going to grind them down later, I just don't want any boost leaks. But right now we're working on the intercooler, which is going to sit, right here, and yeah. So one of the problems with obviously putting a fuel tank in a trunk is where the outlet where you would normally fill fuel is going to wind up. In this setup, it's actually pretty good. What we're going to do, since the bottom of the Volkswagen fill neck actually kind of sits right in between the frame of the car and this arm, so all I needed was a hose to go up to there. I was originally going to use like a full-length hose. These are radiator hoses and they are not cheap, surprisingly. I will be returning them. I went with my simplest solution. This hose, I'm going to cut it just a little bit to get a little bit more clearance from this shock. It's going to tilt up a little bit more probably, and it'll be fixed in position by a piece of the part that I cut. We're going to cut it appropriately and actually weld this so that it kind of holds it away and does everything I need to. There is a little bolt hole right here. We'll weld it, we'll put it all up, and it's going to be pretty factory looking considering it's a fuel tank in the trunk. And this is the factory fill neck tube that I'd cut because I knew I was going to need to do this at some point. It's going to be making a cut there, and hopefully it's going to be pretty much the right length to meet right up with that little piece of hose I got. It's not a fuel hose, it's actually a radiator hose. It just needs to work for a little while, or it'll just work forever. I don't know. I haven't used a coolant hose in place of a fuel hose before. Like I said, we're going to cut this, weld it up, and it should look pretty factory. But yeah, a lot of this build has just been sheer fabrication. Just cutting, grinding, cutting and grinding things, figuring out how they're going to fit. There's just a lot of this where you're just modifying stuff. I've pretty much just been modifying what I already have or have been given, which has actually made this a pretty cheap build. I probably haven't even broken the $1,000 mark yet, and I'm getting ready to start it. I mean, it's going to be on the road for like $1,000. Now, granted, I did have a lot of these parts to begin with, but at the end of the day, honestly, anyone could make this with like $1,500. You can get yourself like a Mark IV 1.8T or a VR6 or a 2.0 if you're that stupid to go that route. The only reason I'm using a 2.0 in this application is because it was boosted from a previous car. It was a ready-to-go package. I already had everything I needed. I'm pretty much just modifying everything I already had and modifying what the Civic's giving me as far as the lines and everything. But, I mean, in general, this is a cheap build. This is just sheer fabrication. It's a lot of work, but, I mean, built not bought. Enough said. It's definitely fun. It's definitely interesting, and anyone can do this. Follow this kind of build plan. I mean, you could pick up a Civic for $500 that needs an engine. You could pick up a Mark IV that needs like a clutch or has been rear-ended, or it's a Mark IV for like $500. So you can definitely make this car for nowhere near as much as you think it costs. But again, it's just a lot of work. This is not just bolt on stuff and, you know, drop it down. This is like spend 3 hours trying to figure out how to bolt something to something in the first place. So let's get back to it. So in a rare occurrence, this went absolutely swimmingly. This is everything I could have hoped it could have been, again, considering I'm putting a gas tank in a trunk. This is like a $2 radiator hose that happened to be the perfect bend. All I pretty much did was just cut this shorter. It used to terminate about here. I just cut it shorter, bolts into the factory bolt hole with the factory little clamp. Right up in there, we got a connected fuel tank. You now use the Honda fill door to fill the Volkswagen fuel tank from the trunk. Seriously, this was great. This was so smooth. This took like 10 minutes. I didn't have a single issue. It's such a rarity. I'm just savoring the moment. And I get to return like $50 worth of radiator hoses I did not use. Okay, so one last thing we got to work out for the fuel system, besides just running the line's already there. I'm using the Honda line to get the fuel up there. The one cool thing about my particular BEV 2.08 valve versus AEB or ABA or whatever is they use a return line, whereas the BEV does not. So the BEV fuel regulator is actually within the fuel filter, so I have to run the BEV fuel filter in order to run the BEV motor. It's not an option, at least as far as a plug and play without doing any sort of tuning or anything. So we do have to get the BEV fuel filter with the return line that's built into it, as opposed to being usually on the fuel rail like the VR6 that replaced it in my car. It was actually a problem. I was like, wait, I don't have a return line. I had to figure that out and run a return line. But yeah, we'll pop this fuel filter on and ride it appropriately, and then run the fuel to the Honda fuel line, and then send it up to the motor, and then hook it up to the motor, and then we're pretty much done with fuel. This is actually pretty straightforward. I mean, minus, you know, cutting out the entire rear of a... Hey, get out of here. Cutting out the entire rear of a car to fit a fuel tank and making a custom rear. But yeah, other than that, the actual lines part has been pretty simple. Alright, well, we are all lined up. I got the BEV fuel filter and fuel pressure regulator up in the fuel tank. I did have to modify it a little bit, for whatever reason the fitting just didn't fit. I don't know if it's slightly different size, but I had to just fuel hose that. So that's feed, that's return, that just goes back to the tank. Bam. And then I used a factory Volkswagen fitting that I already had, well, when I got the fuel pump, and sent that line to Honda line. I literally just unclipped it and just plugged it in. It's going to be zip tied, probably. Keep it simple, just right like that, and it'll give me all this space to work with, because this is where the muffler and or any sort of exhaust stuff has to go, since you don't have space for it in the back with that fuel tank anymore, or at least nowhere near as much as you used to have. But that's fuel sorted out. Fuel tank's fitted and can actually provide fuel to the car. I'm hoping all that works. Honda fuel line pops out here. We're going to send this close to the fire. We're going to clean all this up, obviously, but right now I'm not going to do any sort of work that's unnecessary. If this thing doesn't work at all, it's all a waste of time. So that's the fuel line, wraps around there. It's going to go under the coolant bottle. We're going to neaten that up. It's going to be tucked away, hidden. Coolant bottle is going to make a little custom bracket. It's going to sit about there. I did have to extend the line that went off it, the feed line, or return, I can't remember what the one this is, feed, and send it there to the factory point. Besides that, we got the brake booster hooked up. It was what I had on the Volkswagen side, and what was there on the Honda side pretty much reaches, and I'm just going to run like that for a while. Not going to worry about cleaning it up. It works, and it was free, and it took like 1 second to do. All I'm waiting on right now is tomorrow. We got to weld little fittings here and there along the intercooler system, kind of clean it up a little bit, and then run all my vacuum lines. I do have to make a downpipe, and that's really the last thing I really have to do. Once I make this downpipe and plug everything in, we're a go to try to start this stupid thing.